I mean, I guess I'm on a like KBS is like the government broadcaster in Korea, and they have this like world radio platform that's in English.
Oh, cool.
And I'm on the radio once a week, which you can listen to through streaming or an app. With I don't know if you know her, Lena Park. She's like a famous balladeer in Korea, and so I'm on that once a week, and I talk about Korean music and Korean music history. So.
Oh yeah, should definitely plug that then.
You might as well.
Yeah. All right, ready?
Yes.
Alright, so we're really excited here today. We've got a really cool guy with us. It's a major part of putting K Factor together. So today we have Jakob Dorof here. He's a writer for Pitchfork, Vice, Spotify, GQ. List goes on.
Back in the day.
On and
GQ
on.
Korea.
GQ Korea.
Big difference.
And yeah, again, he was a huge part of putting all this together. So I thought maybe we could begin with just like letting the fans get to know you a little bit.
Sure.
What your background is.
Well, like you said, I guess I started writing about K-pop way back when, like 2012-ish.
Yeah.
I first got into it a little bit before Gangnam Style happened. I've been aware of it for a couple of years, but really dove in early 2012, I would say. Moved to Korea at the end of 2014. Got involved in a bunch of odd job projects and things in and around the industry in Korea. Just met a bunch of people. And yeah, one of those, the most recent of those has been this K Factor show, which I guess we've been working on for like basically a year. Yeah, there was a lot that went into it before it ramped up towards the end here. But yeah, what's up? And I still live in Seoul. I've been there for about 5 years now, which is kind of crazy to think about.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's what it is.
Cool. So I guess I know you're a musician, but maybe you can talk about that
Sorta, yeah.
a little bit.
In college, I had a very ambitious music project that was like orchestra sized. It was about 20 people, a rotating lineup, sort of. In many ways, it was kind of like NCT.
Okay.
In that it was modular and always changing. There was a lineup of it in New York and one in New Haven and Philly, and it was a ton of work and probably really hard for people to understand what we were doing. Yeah, so I played bass guitar in that and came up with arrangements and things.
Cool.
And,
Philly's got a really great music history.
it does. Philly Soul and stuff like that. Sun Ra lived there for a little while. My dad hung out with Sun Ra back at his old dilapidated mansion somewhere in what part of Philly that was. But yeah, some good stuff back in the day.
What kind of genres were you into back then?
Well, back in the 70s when I was a twinkle in my
whenever,
father's eye.
you know.
Yeah. I would say, so for the first 12 or 13 years of my life, I didn't like music at all. I was a really weird kid and just wasn't into it. I think probably, like, subconsciously I liked the video game music I was hearing because I was really into video games as a kid. But like stuff on the radio and stuff, I just for some reason couldn't connect to. Then I got really into Nirvana when I was 13, and was
like all of us, though.
Yeah, sure, and was kind of close-minded and stupid about the types of music I liked until around college hit, and then I got very into everything and became really exploratory in my listening. And the music project I had in college rewarded me like listening to as much stuff as possible. So I became really, really interested in everything and listened to music from every decade and across the centuries and whatnot, every genre. Took a lot of classes in college about different periods or locales of music, and felt probably erroneously like I knew a lot about music and music history around the time I found K-pop for myself in early 2012, and just felt kind of disoriented when I first checked it out, because it was sort of like it seemed to be operating by a few different kinds of logics that I hadn't really encountered before musically, and as like a business structure, and like, why does this group need 10 members when none of them are playing instruments, or just didn't really understand any of it. Found out there was like a dormitory system and things like that, which pre-Gangnam Style, again, not really anybody was covering. So, there are exceptions. I think Jeff Benjamin was already on the beat at that point, but it seemed to be like very low awareness about it in general. So I thought, I could write about this at first from like a business perspective mostly. I thought like some kind of big explainer of like how the whole system works could be really fascinating. Got kind of waylaid from that, but in any event, I started listening to a ton of K-pop to research that, and started noticing, as a musician and somebody I was also a music critic at the time, from that kind of perspective, like, wow, compositionally and production-wise, from a sort of strategic song form approach, there was some really interesting stuff going on that like I hadn't really encountered in popular music or any kind of music before, and it was fascinating to me that the song could be like really visceral and fun and function as pop music, but get there in a kind of diagonal way from a Western pop perspective, with all the key changes or like the big genre bending stuff going on, or just these huge contrasts from section to section. So that was the perspective that I got really deeply interested in it, and like started writing about it, I guess, primarily from that perspective, and that was a huge motivator for me in moving to Korea really not that long after getting into it, like maybe a year and a half later. So that was key for me, and I mentioned that in part because that's like a large part of what the show is about, the thing that focuses the selections and like the kind of perspective of the show at Lincoln Center. So
so for those of you who don't know, he's credited with being one of the first Western writers for it, right?
I don't know, maybe. Like, I think Jeff Benjamin was already doing stuff at Billboard at that point. There were some other early folks around that time, like Taylor Glaspie. Mark James Russell lived in Korea since the 90s and did stuff about, and he had a book about Hallyu in 2008.
Wow. Okay.
That's a fascinating document because it's before it was like a phenomenon really almost anywhere. I mean, it was big in Japan up to that point a bit, some stuff in China and whatnot, but it's a really interesting time capsule, and he has the rare distinction of having the only interview with Lee Soo-man, the founder of SM, in it, because it was like before he became, and SM became hot shot enough for him to just not touch that anymore. So I recommend that book if you can find it.
So I guess, is there any song early on that really got you hooked?
Yeah, so my earliest memory of it, as in like a thing I can trace to something I posted on social media, was Baby Goodnight by GD and Top, which I heard in 2010, which I think was when it came out. And it was just sort of like a, K-pop kind of moment, right? I didn't really go that much deeper with it at the time. But the song that really changed everything for me was actually Shampoo by After School. Do you know that song?
I don't.
Okay. That was the one I heard in early 2012. That was really intriguing. And it's not really like formally adventurous or anything in the way of like some of the things that the Lincoln Center concert focused on, but it was different enough to strike a chord and intrigue me a bit. It's one of those K-pop songs that basically goes like, I think, over a minute before the verse starts. There's this like very long instrumental intro, and it's really pretty and sweeping, and it somehow reminded me of like a Dreamcast soundtrack or something. You know what a Dreamcast is? It's a video game system around 2001 or something, which is when I stopped playing video games. So it just reminded me of my childhood in some ways, and again, it was that was the one where it was like, well, why are there so many people in this group, and how does the video look so expensive, and why haven't I heard of it before? So that's what made me really curious, and it's still a classic for me. I really, really love that song. Connected with that about that with Jeff Benjamin once. I think his Gateway Drug track was an after-school song from the same era, not Shampoo, but something in there.
Well, that's a perfect segue, because one of my questions was about how adventurous K-pop music is.
Okay.
And my question was, how do you think that's possible? And are there, obviously there's a financial risk, right, to being adventurous in music, and I think we see it in the Western music industry, where you see consistent song
it
forms.
definitely seems that way from a Western perspective. Yeah. And I remember when I was first getting really into that side of it, back in 2013 at that point, I had this really salient memory of being like, number one, noticing that stuff, and also noticing that more often than not, when I would look up like who released that song, it would be SM Entertainment.
Yeah.
They do that more than anybody, I think. I knew nothing about what SM was at that point. That really intrigued me. And I remember around the time Pink Tape by FX came out, I started talking to people who were in Korea, or Korean people, or people in the K-pop industry, being like, something's going on here. And these songs like Rum Pum 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 by FX, or I Got a Boy by Girls' Generation, some Shiny tracks from that year and whatnot, EXO, and then of course also lots of like Big Bang and G-Dragon and stuff like that too. I would tell these people like, or ask them rather, like, do you know why this is happening? Or like, what is this phenomenon here in the composition and production of these certain tracks? And when I would get really into it, people would be like, oh, well, like, you couldn't talk about that with like S, like that must be a coincidence or something, because like a company like SM, they just care about money, like they don't care about whatever you're talking about at all. And I knew that had to be wrong, because I'm like, there's no way this would happen by accident. And these are just, at least from a Western perspective, not commercially helpful decisions to make.
And the musical decisions are crazy.
Right. From what my perspective was back then, definitely.
Yeah.
So that was a big mystery for me, and it was sort of a feeling of just like, I want to go over there and like talk to them, like I want to figure that out.
Yeah.
And some other things in my life were kind of falling apart or opening up in a way where like moving to Korea didn't seem totally ridiculous. So I decided to give it a shot. Moved there in basically December of 2014. Met some folks at SM pretty quickly, including Chris, who I was really grateful to have attend the concert a couple nights ago. And talking to him, like I was right, like they are really conscious and deliberate about these things that they're doing compositionally and in the way these songs are put together and produced. In terms of the other side of your question, sorry I'm rambling, but like how is it possible for it to happen? That was basically what the concert was trying to explore. It was like, how did this start, or what were the conditions in Korea, in the market there, that allowed for this kind of music to really blossom and thrive there, which is not to oversimplify or sweepingly generalize, because obviously a lot of K-pop is pretty straightforward, right? Like there might be, a very developed chord structure or whatever, but not every song jerks in this way and that way, or has this completely improbable key change that somehow works or whatever. So I don't mean to imply that at all, but in terms of that side of K-pop and the fact that a song like Big Bang's Bang 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 could be the #1 most popular hit of 2015. That seems like a bit of a phenomenon to me, and something unique or close to unique, and the most musically distinguishing feature of K-pop, or at least one of them. And I think the side of it that maybe has the most to give to the world creatively as K-pop becomes more and more influential and popular around the world, and influences more creative decisions throughout Asia and in the Western world and whatnot. I think that side of it is going to be the most influential. That's my prediction. In terms of how it got to that point, that's really complicated. I tried to do that justice in the basically the program notes. It's more of a book for the concert that I had to put together basically last week, which was rough. But I think I did an all right job. And it's something I would love to expand into like a real book at some point, because there's a lot there, and I think I have a lot of material on it, and I'm fortunate enough to be able to interview a lot of the people who helped make it that way. So,
do you think you could share a little bit about that, maybe?
Yeah, I'm dancing around it because it is really complicated, but I feel like the inflection point for modern K-pop that people generally talk about is Nanarayo by Sotaeji in 1992.
Right.
And it, quote unquote, just so happens that song that sort of modernized K-pop in a way has this big, jump cut genre change with the heavy metal breakdown right before the pre-chorus both times out. And there's some, genre blendy things going on where, like, it's obviously predominantly New Jack Swing, but there's like some Miami freestyle synth stuff going on there. And then I would argue that in the chorus, the vocal could be maybe from like a Korean ballad or something like that, the top line. And it's just like a very loose kind of work in progress kind of song. Like you very much hear, a young mind, a 20-year-old guy who's never really programmed a beat before, or is not classically trained or really proficient singer at all, who just likes everything, which he's talked about in interviews. Just trying to make something cool that you can dance to, the choreography. And so that becoming as massive as it did was an inflection point for sure, and it opened up a whole world of possibility in terms of what people could get away with, consciously or not, musically, and have it, be the type of stuff that can sell millions of copies in a market of, at the time, a little over, I think it was like 43 million people. So that's remarkable. But as I try to explore in those program notes, like, there were pre-sentiments of that and importance going back to the booklet makes a case for the 20s, and I think that holds water, but there are certain examples that are really clear, like a major hit in 1949 called, roughly translates to Moonlight in Sheila, Sheila Kingdom, by Hyonin, written by Park Si-chun. And that's a song that in the middle of it, there's like an abrupt modulation, and the song kind of splits in half to this kind of Phrygian mode, vaguely Middle Eastern, South Asian kind of theme. It's like clearly Exotica. He did a lot of that kind of thing. And it just disrupts the flow of the song, like almost in a hallucinatory kind of way. It's a really psychedelic song in general. And that was a massive hit. So there were moments like that leading up to Nanarayo in 1992 that made that kind of song make sense in the market in a way that if none of that other stuff had ever happened, maybe wouldn't have been the case. You kind of need something to set the table. So that's the short of it. Could talk for another hour, but
I mean, you've got a book coming, it sounds like, so
if anybody's watching and has connects for that kind of thing, maybe. But I have a draft anyway.
You
Very rough draft.
A very good draft, yeah. I'm sure those programs will be on eBay and someone can get a preview of.
I hope not. I hope it stays like a special thing just for the people who are able to come. But
well, we'll see how much money can buy, I guess. So yeah, there's obviously a lot of global influences in the music, a lot of genre mixing. We mentioned that.
Yeah.
Obviously, a lot of different modes.
Yep.
Do you think how does that impact the K-pop audience, the modern audience? You know.
So one of the central theories of the show, I guess, or the argument that we're putting forth is in explaining the popularity of K-pop. People talk about all kinds of things, Western journalists or even the fans themselves, they'll articulate it different ways. But we think it has to be the case that one of the main things that keeps fans coming back is that the music is giving them something unique, right?
Yeah.
Something they can't get somewhere else. That could be as simple as like a production style or something like that, very superficial, which I think is also true. But that deeper compositional aspect to it and the logic of those songs and the way that it can continually surprise you and be like kind of like a roller coaster ride, like the new Red Velvet song. Seems to be. Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's a big part of it, and we thought in putting on a show with an orchestra at Lincoln Center, what better side of K-pop to focus on than something that's under-discussed, underrepresented, I think, to a large extent in the press so far.
Yeah.
And the most compositionally, musically interesting facet of K-pop, because that's going to hopefully translate the best to an orchestral experience where you don't have the singer out front, or you don't have the choreography or these other things to hold your attention. So yeah, that's why we took that slant with it.
Yeah. So is it for you? Would you say, for you and I guess a lot of people, would you say it's the sort of authenticity that's present in K-pop that you think really drives it forward, or
the compositional stuff?
I guess
being the authenticity of it
across the board.
I wouldn't be so brash as to say it's the main driver of the popularity. Millions and millions of people love K-pop, and they've all got their reasons, and some of them are subconscious, and that's true for me too. But I think it's definitely a big component in it, and a side of it that should, I would hope, get a little more attention than it does right now. Not to say nobody does. I mean, I was writing about this stuff in mainstream Western media 5 or 6 years ago now. But I think with all the attention coming to K-pop from around the world, especially the Western world in the past 2 or 3 years, that side of it gets lost in the wash pretty often, and it's, I think, something that would be great to focus on more, because it's super cool and it's super different, and I think it's important to why it's succeeding so much, for sure.
So how do you see, I guess, this concert, how do you think this changes the K-pop world? Do you think this is a turning point, or?
I would not be bold to say that, bold enough to say that myself in any way. I think our only goal with it was to kind of use this opportunity to pay a compliment and to pay respect, and I used the opportunity with the booklet to try to interview as many of those people as I could and get their perspective in it, which helped inform the choices we made in terms of the set list and whatnot. So I don't think this will be a turning point in anything personally, but it is a celebration of that side of K-pop and all that it's achieved, and as is expressed in the booklet, voicing a bit of an optimism for where things go from here, globally, culturally, on a level that's far bigger and more important than just cool compositional techniques or whatever. But that's definitely in the mix, and I think I would love to see that influence Western pop a little bit, and to have, much like K-pop took ideas from Western pop and from around the world and made their own unique thing out of it, which is what this concert was about. I would love to see like the West's reaction to this side of K-pop, and I actually posit that perhaps we're already seeing that to an extent. Like I mentioned in the booklet, I think there's certain Taylor Swift songs off her most recent album, I think, that are a little bit K-poppy and a little bit out there in that way.
Yeah.
Or even just, something like Sicko Mode by Travis Scott being as popular as it is. And do I think Travis Scott or his producers are like referencing K-pop tracks in the studio? Probably not, but it is a very similar structural logic to some of the SMP style K-pop or whatever. So that coincidence is interesting to me, and I think the West is more receptive than ever to K-pop. We might see more of that for sure.
So, for those fans who couldn't make it, it was really cool the way you guys had several talks. I remember. I know Chris had a talk the day before, which was about. He basically talked about how important K-pop is to Korea, how it's really representing them, how there's a social component to it. There's sort of a mission, and I guess going off of that, during the concert, it started from the Korean national anthem, for example, right?
Right, or the first one, actually, yeah.
So I was wondering, what has this whole process been like to put this together? Like, when did the minds come together,
Hard. The minds came together over a year ago, and we were batting around the idea of it for a while, and then there was 6 or 7 months of waiting to hear back from Lincoln Center, during which time I just assumed it would never happen. And then they said yes, and it was off to the races from there. I guess that was November. And very early on, I involved, do you know who Ina Kim is? Ina Kim is a really big lyricist in South Korea. She's done major hits for everybody, IU and Brand New Girls and SM artists, YG artists, JYP, like everybody. She's actually known in Korea for being like quote unquote the most successful lyricist in Korea because of all of her credits, and so she's awesome, and she's also kind of like a creative director kind of role in a way, or she's on the creative team behind like making IU the first 4, 5, 6 years of her career or whatever before she went fully independent, and Brown Eyed Girls and their solo careers and stuff. So she's done a lot of very creative stuff and done some A&R, and is also kind of known in Korea for being a bit of like a Korean music history nerd herself. So I wanted to involve her and get her perspective on things, and that was super helpful and awesome to be able to work with her in that way. And also this guy, Ji-Hoon Sok, who is a prominent historian and scholar of early modern Korea, so like early 1900s, basically late 1800s. And he really helped with narrowing down some of the earlier selections in the set and providing a ton of context, which we used to like make sure that the way we were presenting things was accurate, and gave a lot of amazing info that I used for the booklet. So we were working on all that stuff pretty intensively from probably December, and it was tricky because in trying to do something that was going to be deeper and more thoughtful than just Lincoln Center presents a symphonic tribute to K-pop.
Right.
There were all these criteria that we were trying to satisfy at the same time, which was like it fits the framework of like this like formerly adventurous, inventive side of K-pop. Ideally, a good number of songs that people will recognize. There were less than maybe some people expected, I don't know. But definitely want some of those in there. And at the same time, we're trying to choose songs that are going to orchestrate well and not bore because they're too repetitive or something like that. and a bunch of other criteria that was just like, it was extremely hard to balance, and we threw out a ton of stuff, and that was probably what took the most time.
Yeah.
So I apologize to the other two guys, main guys involved, and the rest of the team for being so difficult about that.
Yeah.
But I was the real taskmaster about like, oh, that's not going to work.
Yeah.
Because it really, we were trying to hit all the targets at the same time, and that made it really, really, really tricky. So.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I know when I was watching it, definitely it was very clear that there was a sort of deeper meaning going on.
I'm glad to hear that.
So, it was really nice.
Thanks.
So I guess kind of going off of that again, what's your perspective? I mean, Chris talked about, how important that mission is to SM as well. So
Yeah.
how do you see that kind of manifesting itself in the way they produce music, the way they put out artists?
Which mission specifically?
I guess it's kind of like the cultural responsibility sort of part that he was mentioning. I mean,
Okay.
not those words specifically, but
Right. It's an interesting question. I think SM they're a very thoughtful company in general. I think they're very aware of musical history and K-pop history and modern Korean history, and they always want to push the envelope of what's possible and what can happen in the Korean market and in the global market, and they pursue that at pretty much every corner of every aspect of what they do. And I've felt really lucky and honored to know a lot of those people for several years now and get inside their heads a little bit, and to be able to learn so much from them. So I have a lot of respect for the way that they view their craft and their place in the world. And I think in the coming years we're going to see some really interesting stuff from them that we haven't seen before.
Yeah.
And I'm really excited for that.
well,
Sorry, I'm not sure if that answers your question, but
no, totally.
yeah.
It's probably just freaking out because we're going for like 30 minutes. So
Right. I'm just trying to make sure my head's not cut off. I think we're good.
Yeah.
Whatever.
All right, cool. What were we on? Talking about, creative stuff in the future. So I guess we'll have to just wait and see.
For me?
For
For
SM.
K-pop? Yeah. I mean, there's nothing I could say to that specifically, but they're always experimenting and they're always thinking about new things, new ways, and I like that they're really willing to take risks, and sometimes things don't work out exactly as planned, because how can they always? But I'm very excited for what's next.
Yeah, so I guess going off of that again, what changes have you noticed since you started covering this? Have you seen changes like regionally, musically? Huge, broad question.
I think everything's changed. Number one, I first got into it in 2012, which I think was coming at the tail end of a period where K-pop was actually pretty formally conservative by Korean market standards. And January 1st was when I Got a Boy came out in 2013. And I really think that was the reopening of the floodgates of the 90s in terms of formal innovation and open-mindedness in Korean pop, and we've been on that ride ever since. There's been so much amazing, distinct, original pop music coming out of Korea in that time. Not to say that the years of 2009 to 2012 weren't original or interesting or amazing, because I think they were too. I love pretty much every decade of Korean music, but that alone I think was a huge change pretty early on in my coverage of it, at a degree and to an extent I was not really aware of at the time. I think obviously the success of BTS has changed everything in terms of how it's received in the world, but also their success has had like a really fundamental influence on the logic of K-pop itself and the way that companies think about what's possible and what kind of sounds they go for and everything. So I think that's been a massive change that we're only beginning to understand, maybe. I mean, living in Korea, it's a head trip. From 2014 to 2016 alone would be like a massive change in terms of what South Korea or Seoul was like, as far as I could tell. And I feel like every year or two it feels like a new place to me. So it's constantly changing, and that obviously reflects in the music, and the music reflects it back onto Korea. And yeah.
Could you elaborate on how does it feel like it's changing all the time?
Seoul itself,
Yeah.
Korea. Well, I'll say one thing. When I first moved to Seoul, the end of 2014, I was probably ignorant of a few options that I just hadn't heard of at that point. But I thought Korea didn't have any good coffee. It was terrible, so I actually quit coffee when I moved there.
Oh no!
But within a few months of that, a place called Hell Cafe opened.
Okay.
And I'm pretty sure it's the best cafe on earth.
Oh man.
It's like the high watermark for coffee now
All right.
in my life. Nothing. I came back to New York where I thought there was good coffee, and it's nothing. See, I don't consider myself like a fan
That's
of like
exactly
any
where
like
I am.
artists or whatever. You know, like I really like songs. I really like maybe some producers and stuff. It's just kind of all about like the end result to me. But I'm a huge fanboy for like coffee places that I really like, or food or whatever.
What do you think about Blue
goofy.
Bottle? Good question.
I've
try
been
it
going
out?
back there. So like actually a couple days ago, the morning of the show. No, it was the morning of my. I did an event at Korea Society with Chris Lee from SM actually, and Sohn Lee, who was a huge balladeer pop star in like the late 90s, early 2000s, and is now like a New York City lawyer. And I was on the way to Blue Bottle at 7 a.m. because I haven't been sleeping in forever to get some coffee. And a massive cement truck just like inched by, slow motion style, but was heavy enough that when its wheel hit a pothole, it just geysered like black tar water all over me.
No, man, that's
And like
awful.
went straight down to like my scalp and all over my clothes. So I'm gonna forever think of that in regards to Blue Bottle coffee
Oh man, that's too
from
bad.
now on. But I think it's decent. The cold brew, which I used to love, was my favorite cold brew in the world, doesn't register for me anymore.
Oh.
So I don't know if I've changed or it's changed. The New Orleans one with the milk in it is still like it's decent. It's worth getting. But the straight cold brew, not really feeling it. There's at least 10 in Korea I'd rather have. Yeah, it's solid. If I find a new favorite coffee shop in New York, I'll let you know.
You definitely have to.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. There's a place in Rochester that's really great.
Oh yeah?
But I don't think you're gonna be up there. So
That's
I
probably
see
not
it.
happening.
Yeah,
You
probably.
never know. I'll hit you up.
I'll
if it
get
happens.
you some beans if you want some. They're pretty good.
Okay.
But,
Sounds interesting.
yeah. Just back to the topic.
Yeah, sorry, massive tangent.
Well, fun tangent.
Okay, that's a dumb example. Korea's just changed so much in that. All right, so that is a silly example that's indicative of a larger trend, which is that international stuff in general, perhaps especially food, but just in general, is way more available now than it was in 2014 at a much higher level of quality, and with I think much greater discernment from the domestic market, the consumers there, than there was when I got. I feel like I arrived at Korea at the very tail end of an era. I feel really fortunate to have caught that, just to catch what it used to be like and get a feel for that. But sometime in 2015, 2016, I think everything really changed, and that has a lot to do with I think the end of a kind of relative anonymity for Korea in the beyond Asia of the world, right? The Western world and beyond, like as a result of K-pop and Hallyu and things like that. But that 2014, 2015 time was kind of the tail end of like the era when like most foreigners in Korea weren't there for Korea. They were there for a job, you know, like, and they were bitter about being there. And now it's just like those people are dinosaurs. There's not very many left of them. Everybody there loves Korea and wants to be there. And you've got this whole wave of kids who fell in love with Hallyu sometime before college, and then they studied Korean in college, and now they're moving to Korea at age 22, 23 to like do their thing there, and they're fluent in Korean. And it's just, that alone is a big change. And I think the Korean market, the Korean industry, Korean public in general is much more aware of how cool they are, and like what they're worth really on an international level than they quite yet were by the time I got there, which is awesome to see. But I think that's obviously going to manifest in the music and the culture as well over time. Already started to. So, and great coffee.
Yeah,
really great coffee.
That's important, though.
That's for me. Yeah,
important.
I'm into it.
So, have you seen any differences? What would you say is different between them and, say, a market like China or Japan or even America?
In terms of pop music?
Yeah, and like if anything else comes to mind too.
Yeah, well, it's been well covered the extent to which Korea felt in all industries like it needed to be an export industry and play to the world, not just Koreans. That's had a huge fundamental influence on the logic of K-pop as an art form, and also the way in which they marketed it internationally and ultimately succeeded in doing that, right? In a way where Japan, that just seemed like an absurd notion. Like, you know, we're doing so well here at home, we don't need that. And so I think in a way, J-pop is even now like a little more insular. Right. In a way that's really interesting. I love a lot of J-pop, but I think it's a totally different thing. C-pop is really, you know, mainland China pop is really just beginning to come into its own now. I think there's a very fundamental K-pop influence in a lot of that, as a business model, as like an aesthetic form. And obviously K-pop has had a lot of influence on J-pop too, but K-pop's been very influential in Southeast Asia for sure. But I think they're all pretty distinct, and they're all doing their own thing, and I'm going to be curious to see how this K-pop wave around the world opens up avenues for J-pop and C-pop and V-pop and everything else, and especially seeing how companies like JYP and SM are getting into making groups for those markets. And beginning to use talent from those markets. So that's going to be a massive headache for somebody like me, who's one of my main daily regimens is keeping up with every song that the Korean music industry officially releases. Like album tracks and everything. I listen to everything every day. If I miss a week or something, I catch up. Probably like 8 hours of listening a day. And then I'm also at the same time listening back through history to get caught up on the things I don't know about yet. And that's mostly a joy. Sometimes it's a little cumbersome, or like it'd be really nice to not have to do this today, because stuff's going on. But I think fans are having this kind of question now of like, well, if SM or JYP makes a group just for China or Vietnam, is that K-pop? Like, as a K-pop fan, like, do I keep up with that or not?
Yeah.
And my perspective is, like, it's absolutely K-pop, and it's even if it's not, it's made by these, canonical, crucial K-pop companies. And as somebody who wants to know everything about it, I got to keep up with it. So I'm looking forward to that, but I'm also kind of like dreading it a little bit. Part of the joy of K-pop listening for me is like I actually can keep up with everything at this point. J-pop or let alone like American pop music, that would be impossible, right? It's just way too much of it. There's not enough time in the day, even if you're skimming, So I think K-pop will be reaching that. It will pass that Rubicon sometime pretty soon.
Yeah.
As it continues to tendril out into the world and have these sort of like, joint ventures and things in all these different markets, it's going to get really hard to keep up. So it's exciting, but also a little bit scary.
Yeah. So what's your process when you're listening to a song?
It's actually crazy.
Yeah.
I've been like thinking about like how to share this with the world at some point because it is super eccentric and specific. Long story short, when I was working on my own music project that involved a lot of like basically like musical research in iTunes way back when, I created this like playlist system of like trying to systematically categorize like by region and by genre or song structure or like lyrical theme or whatever. I mean, thousands and thousands of playlists, and some of these playlists have like tens of thousands of songs on them from all across the world, right?
Yeah.
So when I got really into K-pop, I applied the same system to that. So I have literally thousands of K-pop playlists that just sort of like what you guys do with the channel. It's like modal K-pop songs, or like a K-pop song with a really interesting second verse, or like super specific stuff. And I gotta say, it would not have been possible to do this show at Lincoln Center without that system.
Yeah.
Like, it's just really easy to be like, oh, what's a song sort of like this? Because this isn't quite right, but we want something sort of like, you know what I mean? Like, that's been key. So I have that in iTunes still for stuff I download, and then Melon is the main, it's like the Korean Spotify. So I have the maximum allowed playlist on there, it's 500. Maximum songs per playlist, 1,000.
Okay.
Like I'm like maxing out like what's possible on the platform at this point. But I have these two different like databases basically that I refer to for everything, and I'm constantly adding to it every day. Even songs I don't like.
Yeah.
It's like I just need to know that, there's this many Korean power ballads with at least one metal solo in it that came out this year.
It's funny.
So it's really neurotic, but I fortunately live a life that's structured in a way where I can listen to music all day while I'm doing other stuff and just bang it out. And I don't think anybody else listens to K-pop or anything that way. So it's kind of a trip.
So you're like a librarian, just categorizing everything.
So I'm on this show with Lena Park, who's a Korean balladeer on KBS, their world radio dial that broadcasts internationally in English once a week. And they introduced me on the show as like popular blogger and K-pop critic Jakob Dorof, which doesn't really work anymore because I don't blog that much. Like I wrote this big thing for Lincoln Center, but it's not like I'm like turning in copy for Pitchfork all the time anymore or whatever. So I've been thinking about like how can we reword that. So I'm thinking maybe something like bizarre K-pop human Jakob Dorof, or like walking, talking K-pop receptacle Jakob Dorof.
Something fun.
That's where it's at. That's where we are nowadays.
Just try a different one every single time.
I would be all for that. I don't think I can convince them, but all right, we'll see.
So I guess I have one more question for you, and that's, I don't know, are you listening to anything that's for fun? Are you
it's all for fun.
I mean, anything that's,
Korean specifically?
Maybe we'll do one Korean one and then one general one.
Oh man, it has been a ton of K-pop and research listening for the show for a while now. But there's a list that some magazine put out a few years ago of like the 40 most bizarre albums released by like major labels in the wake of Nirvana's Nevermind.
Okay.
Because they just like tried to sign all this like weird stuff.
Yeah.
It's like, well, Nirvana's huge. Like, we don't know what sells anymore. So like, let's give these random college idiots whatever deal we can. And
Yeah.
like, who knows? Maybe it'll stick.
Yeah.
So those are some really weird records, and that's been fun to listen to. Korean example. I haven't really made up my mind about it yet, but I think it's this project called Kinzel, Kinzle.
Okay.
And it really struck me the other day. It came out probably within the past month. I remember I was walking to KBS on Yoido and stumbled across this little EP, and it's clearly influenced by that kind of like trendy, globally trendy emo rap sound of like, you know, Lil Uzi Vert or Lil Peep and people like that. Even Lil Nas X to a point, a lot of Lils, right? But it's like emo R&B instead.
Okay.
It's like slightly different. I haven't heard anything like it before.
Yeah.
It might be my ignorance, but I'm pretty sure it's doing something new. And the first track on there is like, it's an R&B song, but he's doing like a kind of like an emo vocal, and he's like kind of screaming, like barely beneath screaming the whole time.
Okay.
So it has this like insane energy to it, and it's like, I don't even know if I like it or not, but it sounds really fresh. And the whole EP I think is pretty cool.
Wow.
And I think Kinzel's a duo, but the rapper, the main guy on, I guess the singer, he just signed to Psy's P Nation label with
All right.
Fiona,
Yeah.
Edon, and Jesse, and all of them. So you can tell Psy's got some interesting ideas of what he's about to do, and I think we're going to hear more from this kid. And he's clearly talented and onto something new, so I'd recommend that if anybody's curious.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that's a wrap. So, yeah, it was
Word.
great having you.
Thank you so much, and this was a lot of fun.
Yeah. So you can check him out. Do you have any social media handles?
On Instagram, I'm just my name, Jakob Dorof. I've been on Twitter since 2006, when nobody put their real name as their handle, so that's Soyrev, Soyrev. Long story. But yeah, check me out on either, and I hope to do more stuff. Maybe not exactly like this concert, but more things that are interesting in a similar way at some point.
Yeah.
So follow me, and yeah, check us out on the KBS show. It's called One Fine Day with Lena Park. I'm on Mondays. You can listen to it on the show's website, and there's an app that you can download to listen to this like KBS World Radio thing. So if you can't figure that out, ask me on Twitter, and I'll be happy to sort you through.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah, and if you like content like this, definitely let us know. Leave us a comment and a like. And yeah, it was really great having Jakob here.
Thank you so much, man. It's been really cool.
Hopefully more in the future.
Yeah. So whenever I'm around, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
Come to Korea. I'll show you some coffee.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, that's what I'm gonna take away.
Do it,
Coffee.
man.
Yeah. All right. That's a wrap.